Welcome to Ray's Reflection, the Common Man's Bible Study. Today we're going to start in chapter 9 of John. Chapter 9 is Jesus healing a blind man. And there are a lot of things we have to dispel. So let's get started. Verse 1. And Jesus passed by. He saw a man who was blind from his birth. Now, throughout the Scriptures, especially in the New Testament, God has used afflictions in human life, in human experience, to explain away the sinfulness or the condition of man. One of the common ones is leprosy. Leprosy to show the sinfulness of man and how it can only be cured by God. Here is another one, blindness. And he's going to take the physical blindness of this man and relate it to the spiritual blindness of mankind. So therefore, this basically is not only a lesson in how a man became spiritually could see spiritually and physically, but also it's also a picture of the willful unbelief of men and how they examine things of God. And we will see this. Now it says, as Jesus passed by, you must remember he has just left a confrontation with the Pharisees, the spirit leaders of Israel of that day, and the confrontation ended up in a melee where they wanted to pick up rocks and stone him, and he departed and went in between them and left the temple area. And as he was leaving the temple area, he meets this blind man. Now this blind man is not allowed into the temple area because he is blind. He has a defect. So therefore this took place outside of the temple. And verse 2 says that, and his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Let's first ask ourselves this. Does a blind man know that he is blind? And I have a question on the PowerPoint. It says this, don't the blind know they're blind? And the answer is no, they don't. This man was born blind, therefore he has never seen. It is a bit different when a person has seen and then loses their sight. Now they know what they've lost. They know what's missing, and they know what sight is. This man has no idea what sight is. He has no idea at all what he can see. And this is a picture of a spiritually darkened man, a man who cannot understand spiritual things. He's blind. Now his disciples asked him some questions that to you and I might seem strange, but if you look at the theology of the day, and it was perverted, and obviously when you eliminate grace and you accept law, you're going to end up with a perversion. And here is some of the perversion. It says, who did sin? This man? Now, if he was born blind, then he was blind at birth. The sin that he committed would have had to be before he was born. And there were some people at that time, there was a belief at that time, that a person in the womb could sin. And therefore God would punish that by some kind of deformity or some kind of, he would pay for the rest of his life. Well, now we know that's not true, but in those days, that's one of the things they believed. The other thing it says is, or his parents. Now they believed that the acts of one man could be visited onto the children, and they get that out of Exodus. Out of Exodus, I believe in Exodus 20, it says, for he'll visit the iniquities of the fathers onto the children to the third and fourth generation. Now they believe that a father could sin and pass that on to his children, to his offspring, to the third and fourth generation. And that is a mistake. Everybody is accountable for their own sin. what that verse is talking about is it's talking about a general social tendency. For example, today we have over 70% of our inner city black homes are missing the father. There's an absenteeism of the father. And what happens is the child grows up in a home where there is no father, so that when he is childbearing age and he has children, he's not in the home either. And it becomes a vicious cycle. And what God is saying is, you want to change that cycle, you want to change that concept, it's going to take you 3 to 4 generations. Now we have to remember that a generation is to the writer, it's not to us. A generation would be, to the writer, would be 40 years. So if you take 3 to 4 generations, it would take, roughly God is saying, it would take 120 to 160 years to change this concept that is now in our inner cities. And if you take that concept a bit further and say, okay, look at the country as a whole. Look at its sinfulness, look at its pornography, look at its abortion issues, look at its homosexual issues. Now you want to reverse this. And we are naive to think that we can elect a leader, put a leader in place, and he will automatically change this. And yet God says that this kind of thing is going to take 3 to 4 generations. In other words, the sins of the fathers are visited to the 3rd and 4th generation. It will take your lifetime and my lifetime, we will not see the change. And therefore it's naive of us to think that this can happen. But they believe this. They believe that an individual could pass that on to his 3rd and 4th generation, so they ask outright. Now the other thing that did cause blindness, and there was some truth in it, is, did this man sin? One of the things that was prominent during that period of time was a venereal disease called gonorrhea, which is still prominent today. But today we have an easy way of taking care of it. They had no way of taking care of it. And very often the gonorrhea was picked up by illicit sexual activity. And when a woman got pregnant and she had gonorrhea, this would cause the child many times, not always, but many times it would cause the child to be blind. And therefore they looked at the blindness and they said, did the parents sin? And therefore this is their theology. And so consequently we have to ask ourselves some questions, and we have to understand why they asked him what he asked them. And look what Jesus answered. He says, neither has this man sinned nor his parents. In other words, neither one. The issue Jesus is addressing here is the sinfulness of the environment in which we live. We live in a fallen world. And it's very possible that a person is born blind without anyone sinning, or without any society movements or immorality or any of that stuff. He's just simply, we live in a fallen world. And it appears that this is the answer here. And it says, but this was done to this man so that the works of God should be made manifest in him. In other words, we're going to use, so God could use this man to manifest the works. What works? Well, you have to go back to Isaiah and see the works that the Messiah would do when he arrived. And one of the things that it says that when the Messiah arrives, the blind will see. And here we have a blind man who's just about ready to see for the first time. Then he says, verse 4, he says this, I must work the works of him that sent me. I must do what my Father tells me while it is day. He said, the night cometh when no man can work. Now, day here isn't a day like you and I know where it's light and then it's dark at night. And what he's talking about here is life. Basically, it's life. We must work the works while we are here, while we are alive. Because there is a day coming, and that is death, when that work is over. In other words, you and I have the ability to do work for God while we are here on earth, while we are alive. But there's a day coming when that comes to an end. In other words, when we die and we move on to another life, we can no longer work here on earth. So while we are here, we have to do the works of God. We have to be obedient to the Father. Now, how he says this, there is a time coming when no man can work. And he says, well, as long as I am in the world, he says, I am the light of the world. Now, that address has been given earlier in the Feast of the Tabernacles, when we lit up the temple and he announced himself as the light of the world. And now he's saying, I am the light of the world. And therefore, I give the world, what he's talking about with this blind issue, etc., I give the world their sight. This is what he is saying. I am the light of the world. In other words, if anyone is going to see, I am the one who's going to give them sight. Now, what he's talking about here is he's talking about spiritual sight. And he's going to use the physical sight to show his disciples what he's going to do. Now notice the questions that was asked. If you go back to verse 2, the question that was asked was not by the Pharisees or by the ruling parties or by the religious people. It was his disciples. His disciples held on to these. So it appears that we have made a turn in John. And the turn is from addressing the religious people who have rejected him to now taking care of his disciples and preparing them for the chore he has for them, for the work that they must do. So therefore he's saying basically that he's going to show them an illustration of how he is the light of the world by giving sight to this man. And it says this, when he had spoken, he spat on the ground, and he made clay of the spittle, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay. Now, why do you do this? There are hundreds of, there are people have come up with various reasons why this is done. But frankly, I really don't know why he used clay. I do know this, that the clay was used as a tool for something. And if you read verse 7 with me, I'm going to show you what becomes apparent. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is interpreted sent. In other words, he sent him to the pool of Siloam. He went his way, therefore, and washed. All right. Now, why did he use clay and spittle? You know, people will say, well, there's a healing process in spittle, that the clay is to show that he was the creator and he created, and man was made out of clay. Those are all hypotheses. I don't know why he used clay, but I do know what it did. It created a situation where the man had to wash the clay off. And Jesus said, go wash it off at the pool of Siloam. Now, the man could have just taken a bucket, asked someone for some water, and washed his eyes. But what it did was, when he went to the pool of Siloam, to the pool that was sent, named sent, and he washed, that is an act of obedience. And when we are talking man getting his spiritual sight for the first time, there's always an act of obedience. And if you listen carefully to the gospel, right, it says repent and believe. In other words, change your mind. So there has to be some kind of response to Jesus. And therefore his response was, are you going to obey what God says? The second thing that the clay did is it caused the man to have to wash. So the man goes to the pool of Siloam and he washes in obedience. Now the moment he opens his eyes, Jesus Christ is not there. He doesn't see Jesus. All he knows is this man who spoke to him and put clay on his eyes and told him to go and wash at the pool of Siloam, which he did, expecting to see. And now all of a sudden he sees for the first time in his life, but he doesn't see the one who healed him. So he doesn't know the one who healed him. Now, we know the story and how it ends up. Let's understand what's going on here. What we are looking at is we are looking at the work of God to prepare this man to receive Jesus Christ. And in the later verses, he will become a believer. But right now, he doesn't even know who healed him. And therefore, what you see is there must be a preparation of him. Now, in the past chapters, in the past lessons, etc., I brought up an issue called prevenient grace, the work of God before a person gets saved. And that is to maneuver a man to a spot or to a position where he is ready to accept or make a decision as far as Christ is concerned. Now, all the work that God does to get to maneuver that man, and this is part of what he is doing here, and that's part of why he used the clay. And therefore, this happens. Now, he washes in the pool of Siloam, and he comes back seeing. He can see for the first time. Now, I often wonder, okay, he got to the pool of Siloam blind, so when he can see, can he find his way around? And the answer is no. He doesn't know what anything looks like. He doesn't know that where he's walked, etc. He literally has to act as if he's blind in order to find his way around. So the neighbors, his neighbors, therefore, and they who before had seen him, that he was blind, said, "Is not this he that sat and begged?" That's the only work he could get, was to sit and beg. And he would sit and beg outside the temple, since he could not go in. And especially he would sit in the morning and in the afternoon, especially when the sacrifices were going to be made. And people were tender. They were bringing animals to be sacrificed to atone for their sins. And their hearts were kind of sensitive, and therefore he would beg at that particular time. And some said, "This is he." Others said, "He is like him." But he said, "I am him." Therefore said they unto him, "How were thy eyes opened? How were your eyes opened?" And he answered and he said, "A man who is called Jesus made clay." Now, if you go back to the confrontation, or where Jesus met him, there was no mention of Jesus. So someone had to tell him it was Jesus who did this. All right? And he put clay, and he anointed my eyes, and he said to me, "Go to the pool of Siloam and wash." And I went and washed, and I received sight. That's a picture of spiritual salvation, though he is not saved at this moment. All he knows is, I can see. I can clearly see what's going on. And he knows that it was Jesus. And he said, "That's all I know." And then said they unto him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." In other words, here's a man who got sight, and for the first time he can see. He doesn't know where Jesus is. And don't ask any directions of this blind man. He couldn't possibly tell you, because he's never seen what he is now looking at. If he closed his eyes, he might be able to tell you how to get to there. Take so many steps, turn right, blah, blah, blah. When you hear this, turn left, and so on. But as far as being able to see, he has no idea where he is or what he is. But all he does is tell you what he knows. This man told me, put clay on my eyes and told me to go wash. Now, and it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Now, is healing a blind man of his sight a wonderful thing? Yes, it is. It's a great thing. It's never been heard of before in all of Israel. It's a great and wonderful thing. But notice, when it happened on the Sabbath day. Therefore, the laws, the legalistic laws that the Jews had about the Sabbath day were ridiculous. You know, they couldn't even put out a lamp. They couldn't even blow out a lamp to save the oil. They couldn't even light a wick to save the oil. In fact, if a person was sick, they couldn't help that person heal. They could help that person maintain where they were, but they couldn't help him get better. And if a person was dying, they could stop him from dying, but they couldn't help to make him better. This was called work. They were ridiculous rules. And these rules were not passed by God. They were made by the rabbis, written in the rabbinical writings. And this was a Sabbath day. And they held these to be higher than the mercy that they saw. They held their laws to be higher than the miracle that they just witnessed. Okay? And now, what do? Well, very simple. They bring him to the Pharisees. Then again the Pharisees asked him how he had received his sight. In other words, he was asked again, how did you get to see? And he said unto them, he put clay on my eyes, I wash, and I do see. And that's all the man knows. And therefore he tells them, it's as if they're searching for something else. Then again the Pharisees asked him how he received his sight, and he said unto them the same thing. Verse 16, therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Now you see what is going on here? The rules and the laws, etc., are greater than the mercy that they see. Now we notice in the other chapters, etc., the earlier chapters, that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And he has proclaimed that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And notice what they've done. They switched it around here, and they're upset because it was made on the Sabbath day. They weren't upset because a man was made to see. They're upset because it was on the Sabbath day. Others said this, how can a man that is a sinner do such a miracle? Now I want you to look at that one sentence reveals the hearts of the Pharisees. I want you to take and reread that sentence, only this time remove this bias. Remove the bias. That is a sinner. Remove that and read the sentence. How can a man do such miracles? Now if that's all they said, that would have been a very intelligent and very sincere question. And it would be a question that they're looking for an answer, and therefore they would come up with the right answer. But the minute they insert, that is a sinner, they insert their bias. And therefore, by inserting that phrase, etc., they've already come to the conclusion that no man can commit these miracles. And especially one who is a sinner, because God does not hear sinners. And guess what? There was division among them. There was division among the Pharisees because some believed that this man must be of God because he healed this blind man. Others are saying he can't be because he broke the Sabbath. And they said unto the blind man, what sayest thou of him, since he has opened thy eyes? And the blind man very simply said this, he is a prophet. In other words, what he's saying is, he is from God. Now, he doesn't know that he's the Messiah. He just knows that he's from God. And the prophets were from God, therefore this man is from God. But, in conflict with that, the Jews did not believe concerning him. They didn't believe he was from God at all. That he had seen blind, they began to question the blind man. They were come up with, well, you were never blind, that sort of thing, and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received their sight. So they called the parents. And they asked him, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he see? And the parents are terrible. They really are. His parents answered him and said, we know that this is our son. Well, that's obvious. And that he was born blind, that's a known fact. But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who opened his eyes? They know. They say, we know not. They know who did it. And they know what happened to him. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak of himself. In other words, these parents wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted nothing to do with the situation because they were afraid of the Pharisees. And that's what it says on the next verse. And we're going to stop there after we read the next verse. And then we'll pick up the whole thing in the following next week. It says, these words spoke his parents because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already. See the bias? It was already settled. If any man confess that he, referring to Jesus, was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. So the parents aren't going to say that this is the Christ, or this is the Messiah, or Jesus is God, or anything like that, because they're afraid to be put out of the synagogue. Do you know the same thing is true today? How many people hear the gospel message and will not accept it because they're afraid of what their religion will do to them? This is no different. And therefore, because of that, they will skirt, they will evade, they will do all they can not to address the issue that is before them. This is as old as mankind. It's not any different. And these parents knew. They knew who made their son to see. They knew, and they refused to admit it. There are wonderful things coming from this story. And it's a wonderful story that a man got sight. But we're going to see the end of the apostasy of the Pharisees. We're going to see the end of the conflict. And then we're going to see Jesus address this man, and this man confess that he is a believer. So, until next week, I bid you Godspeed from On Victory's Side. We'll see you next